So a lot of this focuses on the local community, the Madison community. We've talked about San Francisco and Seattle communities as being safe places. Say a little bit about how the dispersion into the rest of the world, or differences you've observed as you travel to other conventions and so on. Was the same creativity, the same behaviors? Did they meet with universal approval, or did you have negative reactions on WisCon or on feminism and science fiction in other places?
I feel I got a little typecast. If I signed up for programming, of course, put Jeanne on the feminist and science fiction panel, because and especially in a convention where there only be one or two of those, that panel almost always became Feminism 101. We'd have a lot of people in the audience being angry, which is it's good, and getting things out and networking for the first time. Oh, good stuff. But it got tiring.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that this whole business of, for many, many years, every panel you were on, some 2 or 3 guys would get up and tell you how offensive it was for you to be focusing on this. And I remember various people, including the women we would have on our panels. And that was the other thing. The women writers had, for many years, didn't get on many panels, or there was a feminist panel that they were on too, which is great because I got to talk to them and Jeanne got to talk to them, and they got to talk to each other. But these guys would get up and they would want us to explain feminism. Why feminism? Why do you even have to bring this in? What are you objecting to? So like Jeanne, I got very tired of it. And to a certain extent, we could mute that down at WisCon, which was nice. And there was also, like I said before, this parallel thing going on with feminism and science fiction in the various academic communities that you didn't have to reinvent the wheel for, but they weren't immune either. So, I wanted to say something about France and Canada as far as the larger community is concerned, because one of the contact points I made was through a journal called Solaris. It had a different name earlier, but there was a woman editor, and she was Quebecois, and she and
Vonneberg?
Yes, Vonneberg, right. And she's still writing, and she featured in my dissertation. But Solaris had, I remember reading the first article I read on the pronoun issue, because in French it's a different kind of complication that she had written. And so we know it was going on in other places, but people, when I would travel like to England, people would want to talk to me because, even though I was there for a medieval convention or some other reason, they would want to talk to me because we had come so much further with feminism, and they associated WisCon with that, and yet we knew how far we needed to go. So, I can't say that we started the conversations. I know there was, among women, envy in other countries, envy for what we could do in UK, as well as France and Canada. I can speak to those countries, and definitely in China. But then feminism had a harder road in China too. So when I talked about it being like the world had this hole in it, and all of a sudden WisCon was there and it got filled, it took a long time it was like, women's vote. When somebody does it in some country, there are other people in other countries who then can argue for it. I don't know if I'm making myself that clear, but that's one of the things I noticed. And when I would talk to people, I used to go to UK pretty regularly for 2 different conferences, and 3 if you count utopian studies. And get this information. And yet there were also books being written about women in science fiction that didn't quite connect with what I knew about it. So I remember one conversation I had with a woman who tried to argue a developmental track. I won't say the name of the book, where first feminism was this author and then it was this author. And I asked her finally, are you implying that these are more feminist writers and these are less feminist writers? She said, no, my editor just said I should do it that way because it would make an argument.
Wow.
That, you know, as feminism developed, the women science fiction writers developed.
So we're talking about this from the perspective of the future, right? And we look back and things are sort of compressed in our memory and all that. But really, this is a period of time that's more than a couple of years, right? This spread out over a while.
Oh,
Lucy,
yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you came in a few years after, you came in the early 80s. Were you aware of all this? Did you read the feminist fanzines that Jerry listed, Witch and the Chameleon, Windhaven, you know, various Persians and Appas? You're the inheritor, right? Because you came slightly after. Tell us about it from your perspective.
I did not read the feminist fanzines. I wasn't guided to them at all. Probably just, if I was, I didn't pick up on it, I should say. I mean, Jerry Kaufman may well have said, you should be reading this. This is great stuff. And I just didn't get to it because there was a treasure trove of things to catch up. I had so much fandom to catch up on in general. I mean, in the early 80s, being a feminist was still a little bit of a dirty word outside of fandom, and inside it kind of, you aligned yourself with certain fanzines or the convention, Wisconsin and so forth. But what I found was just women doing it for themselves. Anywhere I went, it seemed like it didn't take anything at all to get women saying, let's do something together. Let's write a fanzine. I don't know when the women's periodical APA started up.
You mean the British one?
Yes, the British one.
A few years after women's APA.
After AWA, yeah, and that, I mean, there were feminists there, but had they been collectively working on, you know, talking about it? I don't know. I don't think so before that. For me, one of the most exciting things about joining Seattle Fandom, besides finding your tribe, was that I would go to someone's house and sit down at the kitchen table, as one does, at Vonda McIntyre's place, so I could talk about Star Trek / fandom with Joanna Ross. And my mind was just the classic, oh my God, these people are real. And they have so much to tell me. And I just sat there with this feast of feminist fandom talking to me. So I didn't get a lot of it from reading. I got it from people telling anecdotes. And I mean, there are other people besides those two. Those are just the big names that I was thinking of in terms of prose. But it was, feminism in fandom was, you could still kind of surprise people, but it was way more acceptable. I think my experience of that was just that it was kind of like, well, feminism, of course, naturally, we think that's normal. And in the two fandoms I was in, I don't know, it to me in the 80s, I have to say this because I was in my early 20s, so don't hate me, but I was like, the 70s, that was a long time ago. What happened then? That was so like, wow, vintage. But it wasn't. It's like when you suddenly realize, as someone who's born in 57, that I thought World War II was like 100 years ago. So as the older I got, the more I was like, this is really what people wrote before me really did have an effect on me, even if I didn't know it, even if it wasn't direct. And when I started researching more women's writing from the 70s and 80s that I had missed out because I didn't have a lot of money to buy books and so forth. But, you know, there was no shortage of interesting women who had contributed feminist information and media at conventions, if you went to conventions, but I didn't go to many. So it wasn't always there for me to find easily, but it was out there. So it wasn't like discovering, oh my gosh, there's another fan. There's more than one of me. It felt more like I had more resources than you guys ever did.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I just have to say quickly, I'm going to have to leave you for just a second to help out my husband. I'll be back as soon as he's done. Okay.
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 Did Jerry mention Tiptree among the list of?
You know, he didn't. Why don't you say a few words about that? And then I'll tell you my next question for you to think about, which is
The Women's Symposium of Science
Go
Fiction, Women in Science Fiction Symposium came out just before Janice was published. And it's something that became much more important to me actually later, but in all of the contributors to that symposium, it was a very thick compilation of letters. I've got a list of the people that were in there that became essential to what to fandom or feminist fandom at the time. Susie Charnas, Chip Delaney, Virginia Kidd, Ursula Le Guin, Vonda McIntyre, Raylan Moore, Joanna Rust, Jeff Smith, he was the editor. James Tiptree Jr., who was not revealed at that point, made some pretty interesting comments in there. Louise White, Kate Wilhelm, and Chelsea Quinn Yarborough. And that, at the 10th Corflu, that was the publication that we republished so that it would stay available. But that to me, if I had been in fandom when that came out, that probably would have been the instigator of everything. But I think it came about at the same time as Witch and the Chameleon, a little later Janice, those things that were going on. I was absolutely more influenced by what was being written than the conventions. The conventions just kind of welcomed me in after I met all those people on paper. But your next question then.
the next question. So we're talking a lot about feminism in fandom, but it is similar but different to women in fandom. Talk a little bit about your experience as a woman in fandom. Do you feel like fandom was entirely a safer place? Was it ahead of the rest of the outside world? Were we leading or following or just about pacing the real world?
You want us to wait for Janice?
Nope, Janice, she left, she's got to catch up.
Well, I think it was ahead of my general social experience that I, as a young single woman, going out to a bar to hear music, which is what I mostly did between college and finding fandom for my entertainment, just go hear live music. And I couldn't get through a night without someone hitting on me, just randomly, or getting some comments, or having to deal with the usual bullshit of being worried about going back to my car or getting the bus late at night. And in fandom, although some people respectfully asked me out, this is in Seattle fandom, I was like, no, I'm not here for that. I'm here for the fan history. and for the fun and for the community, and to, do things together in the name of science fiction, like start little book clubs and go to the opening of Blade Runner and all those things. That was more interesting to me. And so that's partly why I felt it was safe. I felt that I could be female and be myself and not have to fend off the idea that if I was just default single and female, I was a target. I wasn't at all. And that continued to some extent for the next while, certainly when I moved to San Francisco. And I went back and lived, as I said, in Falls Church, Virginia, staying at Ted White's place. Same experience. I never had much trouble at conventions when I did start going to them, world cons, that is, and then I went to a few smaller ones. But I also began to realize that I was coming from a place of privilege there, that I was white, I was middle class, I did not have to put up with some of the crap that some of my acquaintances were putting up with. There wasn't much diversity, so I was just in the, I didn't stand out, so I wasn't picked out as much as some other people were. And I was really shocked when I discovered oh, being a person of color at a big science fiction convention is not a good time.
Different experience.
Totally different experiences. It's very enlightening. So my safe space was certainly not safe for other people. I don't know.
I felt that generally at least the fans that I liked hanging out together tended to be progressive politically, and it's certainly more open to feminism than most of the people in my life outside of fandom. But I think I was pretty aware that the dangers were there. My sister was raped at a convention, or sorry, after a convention, and so it was. The issues were there. So my defenses, the way I acted towards people, I pretty much made it a rule that I was the one that would make advances. I didn't accept. I became very uncomfortable if people flirted with me and I wasn't interested, and so I kept up a pretty strong defenses to make sure that I wasn't always in control. And I don't think that had to do with fandom. That was just me and society. That's how I learned how to survive as a woman. And whether that protected me or not, if it made me feel like I was mostly in control. But then having examples of of other women, especially my sister, of having become a victim, made me aware that it's not necessarily safe space. Yeah.
Well, that sucked all the oxygen out of those conversations. I'm sorry, Janice isn't here to. We're part of it.
I mean, so much of my experiences in fanzine fandom were very good for me personally, and going to conventions is what made me aware of how privileged I was and how lucky I was that I wasn't dealing with a lot of things.
Yes.
For instance, I didn't need to think about accessibility. If a convention was only, had 2 elevators and multiple stairs, no problem, I'm fit and I can take them and so on. But working on conventions with other women, and certainly with anybody, was like going, we really need to start taking this into account.
Yeah.
So for me, the feminism shaded into diversity and accessibility awareness, and how can we incorporate things like free childcare? How can we make this a better place for more people? And that doesn't lead me to talk about the convention that I'm most associated with, because we really didn't do those things, but a lot of other people who kept running the convention, which is Corflu. It's run by a different group every year. And, they made those changes. So and Corflu is pretty feminist, founded by 3 women.
Tell us about the founding of Corflu.
Founding of Corflu. Now, this is where I always get, if I'm going to be on a panel at a convention, which is rare, it's always a Corflu panel, or, and I don't object, or it's a fan fund panel.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since I won DEF, so. Corflu 1 came out of, we had finished up doing the Emperor Norton Science Fiction Hour because we ran out of money. Not that I ever invested in it, I was pretty broke, but Shay was paying for it. And Shay and Alan shared housing, and I was sharing housing with Terry Floyd and some other fans in a different part of San Francisco. Somewhere in there, Patty Peters and Gary Manningly and a couple of other people, but mainly Patty Peters came up with the idea of the lounge lizards, where we would have a science fiction every 3rd Saturday. We would meet up and get together with local fans. But we wanted to do more. Specifically, Shay and Alan and I went out to have a drink one night after one or more of us had had a kind of dispiriting experience at a Worldcon, where fanzine fandom got assigned to one small room, not really any, you couldn't do a panel there, and that was our lounge. And it was way off the beaten path, no one could find it. And I just came back angry. I was like, why is it that I found fanzine fandom just when it's going nowhere and people are marginalizing us? And this is bullshit and we should do something about it. And Shay and Alan were more experienced in con running and in fandom, a little bit older than me. And they were like, yeah, you're right. It's like, we should do a fanzine. I don't think I necessarily said we should do a fanzine fan convention, but I said, I wish we had a convention just for us fanzine fans. But you'd have to be crazy to do that. And they looked at each other in front of me, across from me at this restaurant where we're all drinking margaritas, and the light bulbs over their head, and they said, we're that crazy. And we had a committee a week later. And it just went like fireworks.
Who thought of Corflu?
I think that was Alan Cadogan.
Okay.
Correcting fluid sounded like a good idea. She also said, well, we all agreed we didn't want to have a guest of honor. We wanted everyone to be a guest of honor, a possibility. That if you were interested in this convention, it was because you were worthy to be a guest of honor because you had participated in the fandom. And of course, some of us, namely me, knew that we would never be guest of honor any other way. So I was for that. So, but I mean, it was really mutual that we all said, yes, that's the best way. We don't want to choose someone. We'll just draw names out of a hat. And the name out of a hat was Alan's idea. Shay financed most of it. So she chose the hotel, which was the terribly expensive Hotel Claremont in Berkeley. And Terry Floyd and Jim Kennedy, who were on the committee, came up with the film program, which turned out to be kind of psychedelic because they dropped acid. It got weird, but apparently some people liked it. And there was just a lot going on. But remember, this is 1983, and I have just discovered East Coast fandom, and I stay on after the WorldCon, and I'm doing Good Bitch, and all my committee members are like, when are you coming home? We're doing this convention in January of '84. And I was like, I can promote it from here. And I did my job. But I did eventually come home in time for it. And it was a huge success. We had, I think, 120 people. And so many of it surprises me that it's going to be 40 this year and that I'm going to it next week.
Oh, wow.
Well, it is in 2 weekends from now, but yeah, we thought, oh, this will last a year or two. Fanzine fandom's dying. We really thought that. We thought we're the last generation. It's probably the coolest thing I'll ever have done in fandom. I'm very proud of it.
You
have a lot of time.
But I'm really proud that other people liked the idea and have run with it, because it was up to me, it would have been 2. There would have been Corflu 1 and 2, and then that's it. So that's
Okay.
it.
That sounds like what Pat Murphy and Karen Fowler said about the Tiptree Award. It'll just be this year. Yeah.
So we've been going an hour and a half. I wanted to ask you about the big names. You're all big names in fandom, right? That's why you're on this panel. We're all big names.
We
I
are.
wanted to ask, of course.
I don't think so.
I'm in charge. But
Yes.
so, but any outsized personalities that you've run into along the way in WisCon or in your other endeavors that in fandom that you wanted to talk about or tell us about? Tell us about Octavia Butler. I don't think many of us have had a chance to meet her.
I'll tell one bitty story about Octavia Butler, but I bet Jan has more too. And when Octavia was at WisCon, it was, of course, the blizzard happened, and Dick Russell was in charge of driving her back to the airport after the convention was over. And ever since then, he always has told us, just the meeting before the convention, remember to fill your gas tank, because that WisCon, he forgot. And he stalled out about a mile away from the airport. And he and Octavia had to walk through the snow to the airport.
In high heels?
Yes. The next time I saw Octavia, I think it was probably a decade or more later, I still felt like that we owed her an apology. And she claimed not to have remembered anything about that. But I can't believe it. Senior.
Yeah, I remember that story too. Yeah, so it went right out of my mind what I was going to say. Oh, early on in her career, she was publishing with Doubleday, and they don't promote their authors. They pay them very poorly. And I happened onto 3 of her books because Hank Luttrell had a bookstore and they sent him books on approval or something like that. I don't know with Doubleday how he managed that. And so I read the first 3 books that she had out. And that's when I decided she was going to be a WisCon guest. And it took a little, I mean, some people were already aware, but it took a little time. And I thought she was amazing from the moment I read the first book. But a lot of people, you know, she just didn't grip them. In fact, and here's a funny little anecdote. My favorite book of hers for the longest time was Survivor, which she had suppressed after a few years. She didn't want anyone to ever read it because she thought it was her worst. So of course, what did I write my dissertation chapter on her about was Survivor, which for me, it was where she was the most overtly clear about feminism and gender and power systems. And I had read Against Our Will. And later on, I mean, now I don't even teach Survivor except to mention it because you can't get copies. But although I made several photocopies for one class, but I'm still very fond of the trilogy. No, I can't think of the name of it, but the books are over there, and I've taught it like 4 times now. But she was. What I remember especially about her is how very frank and straightforward she was. So, for example, at the first WisCon, I asked her, Xenogenesis. Yes, thank you. I asked her, well, did you like our cover? And because it was an image of her and an image of, Jeanne will know, a woman writer, Joan Vinci. And she said, no. She didn't like the cover. And then I also, when I talked to her about Survivor and tried to, get at the problem, she also said it was her Star Trek book, and she said that elsewhere. And so it wasn't very well, she thought it wasn't very well written and didn't want to be remembered for it. And I just think about all of those things that she started and didn't finish. At least she kept the stuff so you can actually go someplace and see it. But she was like this, to me, she seemed like the ultimate perfectionist in that she only wanted to be perceived a certain way, and she didn't want anything she thought was a fit or start to be viewed by her reading public. And she was always talking about wanting to write books that people would read more than anything else. So even though I find her books very philosophically dense, she claims that's not what she was doing. I always start out my Octavia Butler course with a later story of hers. It's something like Hello, God. I'm sorry, my memory is so bad. But anyway, it's in a book of short stories where she has God go through various incarnations, starting with the big white oversized guy and going into an image of the Black woman who's talking to him over time. And so that, I guess basically what I'm saying is I never really had to worry about her not being clear about what she believed or making up stories or trying to create a public impression. At least I never felt that way. But she had very specific ideas about what she wanted to be as a writer, even though she would try things like her vampire book, which, interestingly enough, is very popular with classes, the vampire book that she didn't get the second one published to. And somebody else can remember the title, or I can go grab my stuff off the shelf. But like I say, I can't claim to be a friend. I can claim to have had a few conversations and interactions and put her in my dissertation, but been interviewed about her and that sort of thing. But because I just, we weren't running in the same circles really. And for much of the time as she progressed through her career, I was progressing through a career as an academic librarian too, so pretty distracted. But
You want some other stories of big?
Sure. Tell us stories.
yeah, please. I have several more, but
Well, about other people too.
Harlan Ellison came to town.
Of course.
Actually during for the science fiction class that later evolved into great big huge lecture hall and sections, and I borrowed Fannie Lemoyne's car and ferried him around the city while he was doing some of the other speaking. And we were going down Langdon Street, and a woman crossed in front of us. She was a very beautiful woman wearing a red mini dress. And he got out of the car and ran up to her and told her that she must come back to Los Angeles with him. And I'm leaning out the window trying to hear what's going on and why has he gotten out of the car. And I'm stopping traffic here. And she says, I've got a test today. And he said, well, then never mind, and stalked back to the car. So that sort of fits in with the phone call I got just before Iguanacon. If you remember, that was in Arizona with the Arizona had not ratified the ERA, and so Ellison made a big deal about the fact that he's not going to spend money in Arizona and was going to live out of his trailer, and he wanted to drum up some support for some other actions. And I was on the phone talking to a friend, and the operator came on the line and said, excuse me, I have an emergency call for you from Harlan Ellison. Would you mind getting off the phone so he can talk to you? I didn't even know they would do that sort of thing. And so we talked about that. So that he was a continuing presence he wrote a lot of letters to Janice. But I also thought about the convention when Connie Willis and Suzette Hayden Elgin had a fierce argument about feminism. Connie Willis felt that Suzette didn't consider Connie to be a feminist because she didn't wear slacks. That was the thing. Wow. And then there was the year that Sheri Tepper was our guest of honor. Sheri's very seldom. I don't know if she has ever been a guest of honor at another convention. If she has, it's very, very seldom. But she wanted to come to Wisconsin, and she gave this barn-busting speech about the massive effect of population on the earth, and how, as the most wealthy country in the world, we Americans had to do our part and stop having children because we're going to destroy the earth. And it was the people who were excited about what she was saying were all kind of vibrating with excitement because she felt like she was about to lead us out of the hall in some sort of march. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there between Delia Sherman and Ellen Kushner, who are also guests of honor. And Delia Sherman is just sitting there with her eyes wide, and she leans over to me and says, "Can we delay our guest of honor speech till tomorrow, please?" Because they did a purely ad hoc sort of the conversation with one another, and it was delightful, but it was very different from Sheri's, and they were sure that the audience would hate what they had to bring, but it was fine. Our guest of honor speeches have been all over the place. But I think the biggest thing I remember was Pat Murphy coming to Wisconsin and announcing the Tiptree Award. This was during that time when a lot of us were feeling like feminism was brutally attacked. Feminist science fiction was being declared boredom and all, boring and all from all quarters, and we really wanted to do something. And Pat Murphy stood up there and said, we're going to start this award that is named after a woman pretending to be a man, and we're gonna fund it with chocolate chip cookies, bake sales, and cookbooks. It was just electrifying. I before she even finished her speech, the whole audience was standing up and cheering. And by the end of the hour, I had volunteered to edit a cookbook with Diane Martin, and another group was planning out the construction of a quilt to fund the award. And by the next year, we had raised several $1,000s for the first Tiptree Award. But to me, Pat Murphy changed the convention around and got us more focused on feminism again, and led pretty directly to WisCon 20, which just changed WisCon around altogether. We've had a lot of really interesting people attend as our guests of honor, and a lot of them have been grateful to us for that we gave them a forum to say things that just weren't possible to say other places.
I was going to mention the story I start with is called The Book of Martha. It's a short story that she wrote much later in her life, but it's great because it from my perspective, because it introduces all sorts of techniques she's using in her stories, otherwise earlier stories. And that was a very somewhat popular. The Xenogenesis series, a lot of my students who aren't familiar with science fiction and fantasy were very disturbed by that. And as they are very disturbed at all, thinking about things she thought about all the time, which was, what changes to the human body can we tolerate and still consider ourselves human and create human cultures? And, like Blood Child, for example. And it is such a revelation for them, especially I always start out by talking about how I'm in a sense, a cyber person, because I have various little devices that have had to be planted, including one in my heart, that I couldn't survive without. And they probably don't even think of it that way, but that happens to them too. That it's happening to people all over the world. And she's just following a trend, and, but it's like or glasses, even wearing glasses, wearing contact lenses, all these things that have us on the way to being, having an artificial aspect to our being, which she was so good at. The other reason I love Survivor, by the way, is that in her way, there's a problem with it in that almost all the alien females in the story are traditional mother caretaker types. But then you have this female human who would rather be with the aliens, as in The Women Men Don't See from another very famous writer. She would rather be with the aliens than with the far right Christian people who brought her to this planet. And I mean, I'm sitting there going, yeah, you're talking to somebody who used to pack a bag between the ages of 12, like 11, 12, and 15. I would pack a little bag in case the aliens came to get me and sit it next to the bed. I won't tell you what was in it, except for the camera. but the point is that even the stories she didn't like, it would be like having this immediate bond with the thinking. And even though we come from totally different backgrounds and had, totally different career paths, but it's just like she was thinking about so many of the things I was thinking about. And of course, in a totally different way. So for being a shy person, she has an enormous number of people who have had some interaction with her. But I know she had to kind of force herself to be in public too. So.
And now her stuff is being made into TV series and movies and such. And she's one of those writers who is just now being made more accessible to the non-reading public.
I don't know if anyone has tried to watch the TV series.
Nope.
I started, I didn't, at the time that it first came out, it was a disappointment. They introduced characters that really didn't need to be there, like her mother, and
If there are
but
books you love, you might want to skip the movies, right?
well, I mean, I love the Tolkien movies and I love the Game of Thrones series, but this one just seemed to do her. It seems to be doing her such a disservice. But
don't
I mean,
think
I
it was
will.
renewed.
I don't know if anybody else has watched it.
You mean Kindred, right?
Yeah, Kindred. Yeah, yeah. They
No,
made a movie of
I haven't,
Kindred.
I haven't seen
Yeah,
it.
I didn't try it.
Yeah.
So, Lucy, I wanted to get to you and ask if you had any big name stories you wanted to tell. And if not, I have another question for you.
I'll go with the next question.
And the next question for, double jeopardy here. So
Yes.
what question should I have asked you that I didn't ask?
I mean, we've covered a lot of things that I've been involved in and interested in. I feel like the most ordinary fan there is, so classic, so typical. And yet I find that when I go to conventions nowadays that I'm so old school and fandom has changed around me, but it still feels familiar and I still like fandom. I got to live through science fiction becoming mainstream in media and everything else. And I feel that we are all prepared if the aliens actually come for us now. We'll be like, I saw that movie. And I kind of like that, how that has changed. But what I wonder is, why is it still possible to explode bombs about feminism and science fiction when someone comes along and writes something that blows our minds or makes us think differently about women's, and not just women, but gender roles and science and technology and future speculation. I don't know that feminism itself has ever gotten suppressed as much as it used to be. I mean, we finally broke some ceilings, but our experiences as women still tell us that there's a lot of work to do, and there should be more books and novels and manga and all that about the conversation of the connection between feminism and science fiction or technology, and how we change the world on a social level by looking at it through literature or another lens. And I don't read as widely as I used to. I don't have people saying you should read this. I look at the list on Locus, books you should read or best books of 2022, and I don't recognize anybody. So I feel I have fallen to the wayside and I don't know what's new and modern. I hope that our reminiscences of the 70s and 80s are useful, that other people want to hear about it, maybe bring up their own experiences. But I really wonder, what would a 20-year-old female or non-binary person or male or anybody say is feminism now? Because I'm not sure I know.
I think I'd point them at the reading list that every year that the Tiptree Award, the Otherwise Award publishes. There's still some really interesting things. And Wisconsin for the last so many years has been invited women of, people of color, and also gender fluid people that have really changed the conversation.
Yeah, that is a good list. And I do look at it and read from it sometimes.
Subjects.
In as much as I read anything these days.
When,
That isn't exactly a question to ask, but my question is, where is feminism now?
just a parallel comment, not about feminism, but I was on a panel in Boston a couple of years ago, and it was a history panel, and we were talking about the way that different local fandoms evolved. And someone from the audience commented that she was absolutely confused and surprised that such a thing as a local fandom was a concept that existed. Her experience of fandom was to go online and everyone was all in the same place all the time.
Wow.
And the thought that there might be regional differences was alien. So we've been going for closing on 2 hours. And so what I want to do is invite the attendees to put their comments on the chat if you've got questions or if you've got comments that you want to make, and invite the panelists to make some last story, last comment, last statement. What should I have asked you that I didn't ask you that you want to answer?
So I've always connected science fiction and feminism, and sociopolitical and spiritual life. I've always had this difficulty separating them out into separate. So as far as, I didn't say too much about where feminism is right now, but there are periods of time that are extremely angering and frustrating, more so than others. So one of the great things that happened to me recently was I was at a women's conference. I forgot to mention I go to women's conferences in Madison, and I talked to this young person who I identified as probably female, who told me no, she was going to live her life as gender neutral. She, he, it, they were going to live their life as gender neutral. And just the mind-blowing aspect of that for me was that somebody could think that. There was language for it. When I was young, I used to think, a friend and I used to talk about how there were 3 genders. There were men, there were women, and there were us, who couldn't really figure out where they fit. And now we talk about a spectrum of gender. You know, that language wasn't out there. So that's really, really hopeful. But then you have, on the other side of it, it's such a fraught time. You have what's happening to women in Iran and Afghanistan, for Christ's sake, for pity's sake, I guess I could say. And Roe v. Wade. You know, it's like we're in the middle of another violent culture war, and I can't actually see what's going to happen, except, of course, we have this stuff goes right out of my mind. I just read a note about her, but we have this writer, Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood, who predicted some of this and predicted it going further than it is. Is it going to get there? How are we going to stop it? So I guess one of the points is I've never been able to disconnect the kinds of thinking that I do that are a result of science fiction and these kinds of questions about what is our world going to be like and what can I do about it? And for me, that is the biggest, I mean, science fiction, I often say to my classes, saved my life because it gave me a different way of thinking from, I grew up on a farm with 5 siblings in northern Wisconsin, where I was supposed to read books about Becky's marriage, and instead I was reading science fiction. Thankfully, but you know, maybe other people find other ways to get out there, but for me, it was science fiction, and over my entire life, it's science fiction and fantasy that gives me that space, as much as theory does, to think something else can happen. People can be different, and they are. We have someone who can call themselves gender neutral and hopefully get away with it.
Do you want a final statement now or after the questions?
This is your final statement.
Whatever you'd like it to be.
Okay. I have to thank science fiction, the authors and the stories and the feminist science fiction and fandom all together for having changed my life in remarkable ways. It's given me a focus and an outlet for my activism, for my personal relationships, for my career. And I found the love of my life through science fiction. And nothing in my life now would be the same without all that. And so it's really hard for me to untangle everything in my life from what we're talking about now. But it's been a wonderful thing.
This is where we live.
Yes.
This is our community. All right. Then if you're okay with it, I will see if we have any comments or questions in the audience. So would you put your put your hand up in the chat or something, and then we'll put you on the big screen.
Boy, there's been a lot of chat going on. Holy.
Oh, yeah. All right. So does anyone have any comments they want to make? Marcy, do you want to make your comment? I'm not seeing any hands in the chat here. Okay, I think everyone is waiting for the recording to go off so that they can talk. Before we turn off the recording, let me just say, here's John Singer, who would like to say something. So John, unmute yourself.
I think it was the first Fool's Cap in Seattle that had Octavia Butler as guest of honor. And at one point, there was about an hour and a half when she wasn't programmed to do anything. And maybe 3 of us ended up in a room with her. And she told us a story about when she was a kid, that she was brought up by her grandma, I think. And one day she went down the driveway, which I think was about a half a mile, to the mailbox to get the mail. And she got to the bottom of the driveway and she looked down the road one direction, and as far as she could see, there was nothing. And she looked down the road the other direction, and as far as she could see, there was nothing. I think this was in like the Central Valley of California. It's like absolute nothingness. And she thought, from here I can go anywhere.
Whoa.
It's a nice story. Thank you, John. Okay, Jerry, unmute yourself.
I think I have. MiniCon 34, which was kind of the first of the, we're going to change MiniCon and learn how hard it is to do cultural change. But Octavia Butler was our writer guest of honor. And at opening ceremonies, I had brought, a bunch of Jerry Doofy things, and I had inflatable, like 4 different inflatable remote controlled Zeppelins flying around in the room, and we had various stuff. And one of the things, we had Dealey Bopper headbands for people to wear, and I had picked, I don't even know where I'd picked it up, but I had a chicken hat that I had handed off, and somebody in the audience was wearing the chicken hat. And we didn't, we admired Octavia Butler, but we didn't have any personal connections to her. And I had never met her, didn't know her at all. And she came in, and we, the guests didn't really have speeches at opening ceremonies, but we invited them to say, just a little bit if they wanted to when we introduced them. And Octavia got up and she talked about the pleasure of, she knew that she was among her people and she felt so welcomed, because when she had walked, kind of down the aisle in the room, there was a fan wearing a chicken hat. And I was like, I made that chicken hat happen. Go me. I was so pleased that there was this kind of whimsical, kind of crazy Minneapolis fandom weirdness, and that she responded to it so warmly.
Amazing.
It's a great
Cool.
story. It's a great story.
I don't have an outsized story about meeting someone, but I do have a story that's very precious to me about a writer that's very precious to me, and that we haven't talked about, and that is Ursula Le Guin, who I glancingly met here and there at various conventions over the years, but there was a potlatch in Portland 10 years ago, something like that, and she was there, and I had decided to give a party in maybe the bar where I wanted all my friends to wear fancy hats. And so I had mentioned this, I think at Facebook or something, somewhere, and she heard about it and asked if she could come because she had a fancy hat, which Kate Schaefer had made for her, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
And so I said, why, yes, Ursula Le Guin, you may come to my hat party. Okay. And she showed up, and it's this beautiful crown. I have a lovely picture of it that a friend of mine took of her wearing it, looking really fascinated at other people's hats. And we just had a really great hat party, and she held us spellbound with her anecdotes and stories, and yet she wasn't grabby with attention, but just everyone, you know, she was like the lodestone. And that was a great moment for me.
I visited her once in Portland. She'd suggested that if I was in town that I should drop by, and Scott and I we didn't have a car, and so we used mass transit to get there, and she told us which bus to take. And the bus driver actually stopped right in front of her door because I told him what address I was looking for, and the door is open, and there's Ursula standing on her porch going, that'll be my memory.
So awesome.
Sheri, you had a comment you wanted to make?
I wanted Lucy, which then kind of points to all of you, because you're talking about your hat party. And when you first started out about you wanted all your friends to wear, it was like, this wasn't the Hawaiian shirt party, was it? And so I'm kind of going, Lucy, you know, kind of, you know, your own role within fandom of,
It's to make people wear weird shit. I know.
but it's that spark thing in that community building. And I think, you know, all of you have done that in your own ways and in your own paths over the years. And I don't know how much of it is feminism, how much of it is just kind of a humanism, but when we share those things and, you know, kind of looking, you know, not just at the other people who have influenced you, but looking at the influence that you each have individually had, you know, over the past 4 decades plus of Spanish involvement, and then what that's done to our community, and what that's given to our community, and how it's helped further shape our community. I think it's really pretty damn magnificent, is what I think.
I remember a convention in Minneapolis where I started drawing tattoos on people's arms with felt tips.
Reincarnation too. Yeah.
I always wondered what the hotel cleaning staff thought of the bed sheets the morning after, because it came off apparently.
Well, there are many other people we haven't talked about, and there are many, many more stories to tell, but I think that for now we're done. And I'd like to say thank you, everyone, for joining us on this Fan History Zoom, and for being here to tell us how things got started, when they got started for you. So thank you.
And thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to my
great job. Yeah.
Thank you.